And we are recording. So the other thing is that we're going to be very, in the words of Audre Lorde, deliberate and intentional. There's a lot of moving parts. You will notice that I'm speaking, but you will see the ASL interpreter because Zoom, as what most of these platforms are, sound oriented. So the person who's speaking is usually the person that you'll see in your screen. And if you are, would like to do that, then you can do speaker view. I am doing it this way so that the interpreter is the central focus for those in the room who are not hearing and part of the hearing community, those who are part of the deaf and hard of hearing community. All right, so I always want to begin with acknowledging the land where most of us are. I'm assuming most of us are in the US, but even if we're in this hemisphere from Alaska over to Canada, all the way down to Argentina, this is occupied land. And it's really important that we always, I at least always acknowledge that we are on occupied land, to remember that what we're talking about today, disrupting and ending child sexual abuse humanely, is unfortunately a part of a centuries-long reality for too many of us in this hemisphere. So this is not a new reality. This is something that is part of the founding of what we now know as the Americas. And so it's really, really important that this talk is grounded in that, and just really wanting to take just a minute to get in touch with ourselves. And one of the ways we can do that is through our breath. For others, it may be through just touching something, or if you're able to seeing something in the room, just having focus. If not, just to be still in honor of the indigenous people, the indigenous land, the enslaved Africans, the forced migration, in honor of all of us who have survived all forms of violence, child sexual abuse, adult rape, forced migration, police brutality, state-sanctioned violence. Just take a moment to acknowledge that we are here and that we survived against all of the odds. Thank you. So now what I'm going to do is invite my co-panelists to please turn off your videos so that you will right now just only see myself and Yolanta. And I will read an excerpt from the introduction. It is the closing part of my introduction to the anthology. And so just before we get to the closing, just want to say that I am a survivor, as I opened up, of child sexual abuse and adult rape. And I invited 40 diasporic Black people to contribute to an anthology published by AK Press, an independent and anarchist publisher. And I asked each of the contributors to share their journeys as survivors, and also to write about how we can disrupt and end this inhumane epidemic humanely. I didn't want to just end on the trauma. I wanted us to co-envision a world in which child sexual abuse doesn't exist. So I will read from my introduction. I am committed to co-creating communal responses to intraracial gender-based violence outside of the criminal justice system. I believe people who commit harm in our communities must be held accountable. Black feminist scholar, cultural worker, and prolific author Dr. Bell Hooks wrote, and I quote, "For me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed?" Close quote. I do not believe incarceration is the answer. Prisons are not focused on rehabilitation, but instead are a kind of modern-day enslavement, as the incarcerated are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and Latinx, and are raped and degraded while in prison. Too often, family and community bystanders ignore child sexual abuse, but the prison system does worse, facilitating its continuation. Equally as important, so many US laws that are in place to protect victim survivors of child sexual abuse and other forms of sexual and domestic violence end up severely punishing and harming survivors more than helping. The National Coalition Survived and Punished has not only documented this frightening reality, its members also organized to decriminalize efforts to survive domestic violence and sexual violence, support and free criminalized survivors, and abolish gender violence, policing, prisons, and deportations. I believe every victim survivor must take the avenues that best support their full recovery and total healing. Strongly advocating for alternatives to the criminal injustice system helps to deeply interrogate how and why calling the police has been presented as the only solution to the violence that victim survivors face, especially when so many of them are victimized again, when the police or any representative of the criminal justice system becomes involved. What are the ways in which we can hold harm doers accountable without getting involved with the very state that brutalizes Black and other communities of color? How do we create accountability mechanisms that address the needs of the immediate survivors without discarding the harm doers, including bystanders? What are the alternatives to prison that hold people who commit harm accountable by giving them consequences for the horrible atrocities that they commit? What do community accountability, transformative justice, and restorative justice look like in response to child sexual abuse and other forms of sexual violence? My goals for this anthology are to provide multiple roadmaps that explore how we can disrupt, end, and prevent child sexual abuse. These writings have emerged from the lived experiences of a collective of diasporic Black child sexual abuse survivors, advocates, and one former bystander, my mother. This anthology includes most of the texts that were originally published in the Feminist Wire in 2016, with some revisions. Additionally, there are 15 new contributions. Although I wasn't able to cover all of the perspectives that I had hoped for, I am grateful for my sibling comrades who are part of this anthologized journey. I'm especially grateful for my mother's efforts to not only be accountable to me for what I endured, but also to be publicly accountable through her contribution to this volume. Through which she underscores the detrimental impact of parents and caregivers not believing their children. Many of the contributors in this anthology do not believe in police involvement in response to child sexual abuse. However, there are several who believe that we must make use of what few resources exist while we co-create something different for the future. Despite my core beliefs about the imperative need to completely dismantle the criminal injustice system and abolish the prison industrial complex, I intentionally include diverse perspectives that aren't necessarily in agreement with each other in this anthology. I believe it is important to be in compassionate conversation with people who do not hold the same perspectives, but share a goal of naming, disrupting, and ultimately ending child sexual abuse, along with other forms of violence. It is my affirmation that every single one of us will make the commitment to refrain from marginalizing or worse, condoning child sexual abuse or any other form of gender-based violence in the name of any greater issue, which in communities of color often means solely focusing on ending white supremacy. Having your body violated and invaded against your will as a child and also as an adult is a non-negotiable atrocity that must be addressed. The eradication of racism and white supremacy alone will not make our communities and families safe. We should not have to be murdered by white vigilantes, the police, or any other apparatus of the state in order for our communities to believe that harm has been committed. For many survivors of child sexual abuse, physical death is not necessarily the worst thing that can happen to us, especially when we have to engage with our harm doers over and over again without any form of accountability. And I will stop there. And so I will bring on Peter and Adenike Harris. And Yolanta, are you going to change interpreters so that I can, so I'll just need to figure out who that is. So I'm a filmmaker. I'm so used to.
Nicole's joining us.
Great. Thank you, Lanta. I will unpin. Okay, Peter and Adenike Harris, will you please turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves? So really happy to introduce this father-daughter duo, and I am going to let you all introduce yourselves, but I will say that I met them 4 years ago. I met Peter through a very dear mutual friend, Jocelyn Luckett, and heard about this, their incredible healing journey and work that they're doing. And then through talking with Adenike, was just really happy to know that there was synergy through our work, predating even my and Peter's meeting, but we did not know each other. So I'm going to turn off my camera and let you all read and engage, and then I'll come back on when you're finished to engage with you all.
Our healing questions.
What could a father and daughter write? Which dialogue could a biological father have with his youngest daughter that would adequately confront the root shock of her rape by a stepfather? How could we ethically convert our rage into a story that would not be ruined by a subsonic rant against whatever God or devil could allow a child's safety to be destroyed in her own home?
How could our deep communion with such painful emotional wounds open up the door to an even richer revelation between us so that we can actually control the impact of evil on our futures? We tell folks that after experiencing sexual violence, you don't get to where we've gotten without confronting everything that scares you. You've got to engage with each other way beyond your comfort levels. We tell folks that only doing the real work through tears, candor, imagination, even hard-won laughter rewards you with loving lessons and living legacies. Learning and earning go hand in hand.
After Adenike revealed that her criminal ex-stepfather had sexually abused her from ages 14 to 22, every step we have taken since then has been in the spirit of lift every voice and sing. Our goal is to be 21st century conversation starters and healing partners. We'd like to be living examples whose powerful service offers a roadmap to rich, loving, and inspiring non-abusive relationships. We want to embody our motto:
we're all worth healing, and no silence is good that keeps you from talking to the people who can help you. Pops and Ade, father and daughter, Black father, Black daughter. Our work to answer our healing questions will take the rest of our lives, but our lives will not be defined by our work to answer these healing questions. We've chosen to devote most of our work to living and loving and dedicating ourselves to futures of joy and inspiration, and loving lessons we've learned and living legacies we've earned.
We started by confronting the acts of a criminal predator, prosecuting and convicting him, swearing off revenge at Adenike's insistence and direction, and then igniting a transcendent conversation that has excavated all of our fears, explored and confronted the history of our nuclear and our extended families. And simultaneously, we have tapped into the energy we need to be available and to make beauty in our lives. In all honesty, neither one of us want to be here talking about sexual trauma in our family. Neither what Adenike had to confront from ages 14 to 22, nor the grand and intimate reverberations that we confront in real time every day.
We wish that we were an anonymous daughter and her father, living quiet lives of satisfaction and simplicity. We wish our lives hadn't been tainted, if not cursed, by the manipulations of a criminal masquerading as a doting suburban father and husband. But in the words of our elders, what don't kill you makes you stronger. So we lift our voices to sing. We speak because we must, and we speak without shame, trepidation, or doubt that we have a right to express ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So I wanted to just ask about your process, the healing journey that you all have been on, and particularly Peter, you were not, you did not cause the harm committed against Adenike. So it's a different type of journey on that way, but still, I'm sure the horror impacted, I'm sure without question, you all. And so just really curious about your process.
The process really just started with my desire to want to connect with my dad. In the midst of me coming forward, disclosing, the first thing I wanted to do was talk to my father and really reconnect. It also ignited, as you heard in the piece, my urging of not having him be revengeful, not having my mother be revengeful, because innately within me, I knew him retaliating, my mother retaliating, a cousin, anyone in my family retaliating immediately took the need to heal and reconnect away from me and went to, now I have to deal with going to visit my father or a loved one in jail for something they did to, quote, protect me. But then now it's about them. I wanted my father with me. I wanted my mom with me through this process. And it was about that. It was about, let's get rid of the person who did the harm. And then I do recognize the uniqueness, in a sense, of my story in comparison to a lot of the other contributors, because it's not, my dad was not the perpetrator. It was a stepfather. So I can say, quote, get rid of, because that person is not related to me. It was still a difficult challenge, because this was someone who was married to my mom for over 15 years. And I had relationships with his children that, I valued. But at the end of the day, this relationship mattered more to me than the relationship of someone who was tainted it from the beginning. And so that's the beginning. Like, that's part of my journey to getting there, recognizing I wanted this more than I wanted the facade, I think is how I would like to kind of preface it.
Yeah, I mean, we were close, but as a family of divorce and physical, geographical distance, they lived in Maryland, I lived in LA. So we had a long, beautiful dialogue, frankly, as she moved into adolescence and into, late adolescence. Whenever we visited, I was always open. I'm from the 70s, man. So I asked everything. Are you having sex? I mean, do you, You know, what are you thinking about in terms of sexuality, et cetera? So, but the thing that we were missing was just, I like to describe it as just a synapse gap, because we just had enough distance to where earlier in our communication, she could not find her way to leap over that distance and say, Pops, this is what's happening to me. Even though I was on record as saying no taboos, let's talk about anything, you know, I'm literally asking questions about sexuality, et cetera. So that is a deep, you know, this is the thing I'm learning, and that's why I say to any dudes in particular who are about non-abusive collaboration, is, you know, the distance between getting the news that you need to serve and communicate and collaborate, it don't even have to be that big. It's like a molecule out of place. So that process, you know, that she really hungered for, I was ready to just take another little beat. I want to make sure I say as well, and Aisha, you know, our late sister, Tony K. Bombard, you know, I had known her and been reading her work for years. And so one of the great things for me as a guy coming up, embracing wholeness, is I remember her saying, do you, you know, in that book, Salt Leaders, do you really want to be well? She asked the question. The healer asked the young lady the question who was just trying to commit suicide. She said, sweetheart, are you sure you want to be well? Because if you want to be well, you got work to do. And that's the thing, is I always knew there was work to do. Didn't mean I got it right all the time, don't get me wrong. But so that's the beginning, that's the kind of real deep, like, beginnings of the process. There are other things for me, good Black men I knew who looked out for me, you know, keeping my own artistic practice going, which leads to, you know, writing about Black men and joy, all that stuff. But in terms of us sitting right here and me listening and taking guidance from her, it was that hunger for the harmony again, the deep communication again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have any last minute for this segment words that you'd like to add, Adenike? Because I just want to bring in the other contributors, but and then we'll.
I think I would just say my motto is always be kind to yourself. Everybody's journey is different. We are just a living example of what worked for us, and we like to use it as that's why we talk about roadmaps. We talk about it being just an example of what communication can do within your family and on your own healing journey. But be kind to yourself and know that it's never going to look like somebody else's journey.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll turn off your camera and video, and we will shift interpreters and bring on Tonya Lovelace. Hi, Tonya.
Hi, Aisha.
So loving the virtual background. I want to be where you are.
Yes, yes.
So it's you know, I'm happy to have everyone on. So let me just say that I've known my sister Tonya for a long time, almost like 2 decades. Been doing this work on parallel paths and have intersected at various points. And thanks to our sister Luz Marquez Bimbo, we reconnected in 2016 after not seeing each other for a long time. So, which was right around the time when I started working on the Feminist Wires, the forum, which then turned into the anthology. So Tonya Lovelace is the CEO of Women of Color Network, and has just been doing important long-term work around domestic violence, sexual violence, and just wellness and whole being for women of color, and that includes cis and trans women. And so I will let you take it from here, Tonya, with your excerpt. I'll turn off my camera and microphone. I just want to say for people who are having who are need to use the access, to please use gallery view. That's how you will be able to see the interpreter, Pamela Collins, right now, because she is, her video is pinned. So please do that. And I will go off and let Tonya and Pamela do the rest.
Thank you, Sister Aishah. I'm grateful to be a part of this book and this project with you and all of our siblings that are on this, and to Luz for reconnecting us. And I also want to give a shout out and thanks to my mom, to Leila Crawford, who is on with us this evening. And I'm just forever grateful to her. She's still the smartest person I've ever met. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you all. Have a sunset here. My article is called Sunset, and it's my favorite time of day, but it's also a unique time and placement in my life. But I can't remember your face. I can only remember watching the sunset behind your back as you tried to enter me, my vagina too small to allow. Sunset, this is the bewitching hour that both mesmerizes and haunts me. That was the time of day that my assailant liked the most. Sitting by him in my little body, I was forced to please him in ways that a tiny girl should never know, should never have to do. It is this very point, this need to have me meet his silent demands, guided by his hands and mouth and breath. It is this that bubbles up in all of my actions today, my relationships, my motherhood, my life. I was too young to know and too young to understand. I was helpless yet powerful. He wanted something from me and I gave until I stopped, until I told him that I would tell if he didn't stop. I was my own savior and he complied. This is after grooming, after his insistence that his daughter and I bring in other girls, after hide and seek with naked pictures he took of us, after we complied. I finally told my grandmother when she was giving me an innocent bath, our ritual. I said, when you wash me there, it reminds me of when he touched me. She gently asked me to share my story and promised not to tell. She then told as she needed to. She brought the phone to me and told me it was okay. I could tell my mom I was safe. My mom said it was not my fault, that I had a choice. She had a way of making me laugh. She said, your dad can kill him, but he may have to be away for a long time if he did. Or we could go to court. It is your choice. I chose court. In the early 70s, this was revolutionary. A little Black girl in court talking about how he touched me there, all that he did to me, his daughter, and other girls. I was breaking ground. My mother and father were breaking ground. And the court complied. He was sentenced and put on probation, pushed out of the military. But it didn't stop there for me. I reenacted the scenario over and over again, but this time I would be in charge. I would orchestrate the time, the place, the play. Boys, girls, teenagers, I was in power. We will do what I want to do, and it will never fill, and it never filled the emptiness, the fear, the trauma. I do not remember his name. I do not know where he lives or who he is, but I smell him. I feel his touch, and I remember the sunset. I hope that as the sun sets across the country each day, little girls are vindicated. I hope that accountability is bestowed upon those in family roles, extended family, or family friends like my sexual predator was. I would like to see it in the form of restorative and transformative justice. He needs to know, they need to know, what they do to little girls who grow into adult women like me. I'm a CEO of a national nonprofit working to end violence against all women by centralizing the voices and the leadership of women of color. And my little girl is present every day. She is wounded and hurt. Court made me feel like I was my own superhero, but I had no real therapeutic help. With young parents and with a court that did not yet understand, I was not giving counseling at the time. I was left to figure it out and to repeat the same patterns. I still repeat the same patterns. I'm a child sexual abuse survivor, bullying survivor, teen dating violence survivor, and domestic violence survivor. My early child sexual abuse predator set me up for life. I have some solace in knowing that my perpetrator was held accountable in court so long ago. Without a criminal justice response, I'm not sure that an interruption in behavior will happen. While I hate the bars and chains within this Eurocentric Black-hating system, it is presently the only way I know to halt the predatory behavior until other options come about. I would like to see the creation of a national, state, and local platform that will allow for the visioning of systematic solutions, ones that develop and steer accountability practices that put child sexual abuse assailants on the hot seat and put CSA survivors in charge. CSA survivors need to steer this process, and the nation, our communities, need to listen. Because as I cry writing this piece, I know that his touch will never go away. He needs to know. Systems need to know. The world needs to know. At sunrise and at sunset.
Thank you, Tonya. So, wow, you covered a lot of ground in your excerpt. I wanted to, I'm glad that you shared, as I said and read in my introduction, and talked about that there's several contributors who used the criminal justice system and were successful in that their harm doers were prosecuted. And as I started by sharing, this is I'm very much opposed to prisons and criminal justice involvement. I also believe that survivors should use the avenues that best work for them. And I'm really appreciated how you walked and held that tension in your piece, and just would like to talk about that some more with you in terms of, work.
Well, it is a tension. It's a very powerful tension for me. When I was a little girl, certainly I had what would have been, what was considered at least agency, right? At that age, with my parents, with my mom giving me the option and us making that choice. I think that it was, again, groundbreaking at the time. And it was certainly were steps that were needed in my recovery. And while some pieces didn't come into play until I was much older, in terms of getting therapy and seeking support, I do believe that my parents did what was available to them at the time. Most recently, within around the same time, Aishah, as you remember that you were putting this book together, I also became an adult survivor of domestic violence. And it was during that time that, once again, I had to make a choice. Given the circumstances I was under and the immediacy of the unsafe situation I was in, I had to call the police again. And it was at that time that I made them step outside on the porch, and I called my mom and said, once again, I'm speaking to my mother about what to do. And she just said to me, if this is the only option you have, what would you tell other women around the country who are in that same scenario? And I guess for me, in that moment, I felt that that was the only choice that I had. I recognize that as a cis woman, who also is, who has heterosexual privilege and other accesses and other forms of privilege in my life, that was an option that I felt was a viable option in that moment, and I took it. And it was a very hard thing to do because my previous partner had already had engagement with criminal justice system in his life, as many Black men do. So it was already a barrier and a concern for me to make the phone call. But I was truly afraid for my safety, and I made the choice. And it's one that still I carry. I don't think either one of us walked away unscathed from that process. And what I do know is that I do stand on the side of prison abolition. I absolutely do. I am an avid follower of Angela Davis. You know, these are things that I've been following and thinking and embracing for a long time. But I think I sit conflicted, not with the choices around discussion about prison abolition, but with often not having the opportunity that you've afforded us tonight, which is to be able to speak and hear from those who actually had to use those systems, those who may not have felt that they had a choice. And even within the context of knowing that even making that phone call was a privilege that I had. I do also know that I faced also barriers even as a Black woman in that process. And so there are layers to it. And I'm grateful that you gave opportunity for layers, and I'm looking forward for more discussion on the layers.
And I thank you, Tonya. And please, like, I feel like this is such a delicate balance and complicated walk, particularly those of us who are on the left of center and who are navigating our way. And my goal or my hope is that we can have these conversations, these complexities, you know, these complex conversations, because I believe that we're all committed. When I say we all, I'm thinking about the contributors in the anthology as well as many others, to co-creating a world, right? So where there isn't even a need. Like, I want to think about what can we do so that violence doesn't occur, you know, and don't want the weight or the burden to be on survivors to have to hold it all. Like, so we're holding the trauma that we've experienced that has like years upon years upon years in healing from that, and then holding the trauma as people of color under siege from a government, from police systems that are, you know, never been about our humanity, but yet for some, and not that many, there are these kind of openings in so many ways. And you know, so it's a complicated walk, and I appreciate your willingness to not only engage here, but to write about that in the anthology. And that was very, very important to me, to have different voices and perspectives being clear about, you know, the process that I am. Like, I'd never had, there was not even an opportunity. And I know that for me, I did not want my grandfather who molested me, I didn't want anything to happen to him. I just wanted him to stop. But one of the things, and I'll bring when we talk with the whole group, that I make note of with both you and Adenike, is that you all didn't have a connection, meaning this was not a family member who, you know, there's not that blood connection, that whole kind of like, oh, well, pop or daddy or mommy or sister, that also is, I think, something that we also need to consider. So thank you. And I will bring Ignacio on, and we'll change interpreters again. Yes, I will. All right.
Hello.
Hello. I'm just pinning videos, and so Ignacio Hutia Xeiti Rivera is a very, very, very different, and we are members of the Just Beginnings. We were members of the Just Beginnings Collaborative Fellowship, which was a 4-year inaugural cohort, I should say, which was a 4-year fellowship for child sexual abuse survivor, activist leaders, and grantee organizations, most of whom were BIPOC, that is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Working to end child sexual abuse. I've known Ignacio for 20 years as well, parallel paths, intersecting at various points, but over these past 4 years, we moved from being comrades to becoming family. And so I will let you take it from here, Ignacio, and come back. All right, thank you.
Before I start, I should say this. It's funny, I shouldn't have to say this, but I will. For those who may not know, My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am trans-identified. I do not identify as a man. I am gender fluid. And my abuse happened when I was a little girl. And I say that because I think when people see me, they assume sometimes that I am a cis man who was abused, and I think sometimes don't take it as seriously, which is really shitty. And so when I say that I was a little girl, it is legitimized. So I say that to really recognize if we're talking about gender-based violence, that also includes little boys, gender queer, gender non-conforming kids, trans kids, and little girls. When I was a small child, my older sister psychologically and sexually abused me for years. She was only 5 years older than me. My first memories of abuse started around the age of 8, and the abuse continued until I was 15. It wasn't until young adulthood that I began to realize all the ways in which her abuse permeated throughout my childhood, which it still does. My mother told me all there was to know about the dangerous strangers, but she didn't know how to tell me about the harm doer with whom I shared a bedroom with. More specifically, to her, there was nothing else to know about abuse besides not trusting strangers. I'd been contemplating my past abuse for over 2 decades, trying to figure out what went wrong, how to heal, and how to stop this from happening again. I felt that I owe it to myself, to my daughter, and to my newborn grandson to understand this process and proactively address it. While the traditional battle against child sexual abuse has been to focus on strangers, to question them, suspect them, fear them, and run from them, how does the work need to shift? This is where love with accountability replaces avoidance and fear with engagement and courage. When I became a parent, the first few years of my daughter's life were full of terror for me. I had insomnia. I repeatedly battled the urge to commit suicide. I handled the task of protecting my daughter with rage and fear. No one will touch my baby. At the same time, I was struggling to understand my sexuality and its connection to my abuse. I was a mess. I was in agony on a daily basis. At bath time, diaper changing time, and even when I received her innocent hugs, I thought for sure I would abuse my own child. But one day when my anxiety was so intense that I thought it would destroy me, I reached out for help. That help led me to begin my lifelong journey of healing. It also led me to rethink how we discuss sexual trauma and how insufficient our attempts are to prevent and heal from it. My work at the HEAL Project is about giving our children the information and tools they need to understand their bodies in the context of our society, and providing this information while refraining from teaching fear. This information goes beyond the lessons of good touch, bad touch, and stranger danger. The HEAL Project picks up where CSA prevention has left off. It pushes parents to engage with their children around sex and sexuality and helps create well-informed young children. The HEAL Project aids children in finding their voice and agency, and it opens up the line of communication in more significant ways. Our work eliminates shame and uncovers secrecy, the very places where abuse breeds. This accountable love is radical because it is intentional, proactive, and it goes beyond individual wants and needs. Accountability is collective work. How are we accountable to our children? Who will hold us accountable in that work? How do we expect our children to be accountable? When we teach our children to swim, we don't engage them with fear. The lessons go beyond fearing the deep end the lessons go beyond fearing the deep end and the possibility of drowning. We talk about our relationships to water, what it feels like to walk, run, and dive into water. We talk about the joys of swimming, and we inform our children of the potential dangers. Most importantly, we engage them in a discussion about safety and steps to take in case of an emergency. Staying informed about holistic sexuality is a lifelong process that sharpens our abilities to function as connected humans. Even a lifeguard has a recertification every 2 years. Likewise, accountability with love is important enough to require a routine refresher course regularly. The same way a lifeguard is responsible for swimmers, I am responsible for keeping my child and myself informed. I understand the role that power plays here. This is love with accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. And God, thank you for I just completely spaced on pronouns. So when everybody comes back, we will definitely do that. So thank you. And I really appreciate, I love the analogy about the swimming. I remember when I first read that just hits the nail on the head, around, you know, for people who have access to teach children how to swim and all that we really do. I remember being thrown in, not as a source of terror, but just kind of like, you know, thrown in the pool as kind of like, don't be afraid. And there was people there when I was thrown in the pool, because it does sound kind of crazy in that way. And I think as one thing that I appreciate about the HEAL Project is you're just really talking about comprehensive sex education from the cradle to the grave. And also the reality that all harm doers are not cisgender men. And so in terms of your sharing about your experiences as a survivor who experienced harm at the hands of a sibling and someone who not necessarily is your age, exact age, but a peer, because we also think that's child sexual abuse is like the adult and the child. We don't think about what happens between siblings and definitely cross genders. And so just would love for you to touch on that a little more if you can.
Like I said, as my sister, 5 years older than me, and also because it was a girl, it's always downplayed. So there's many layers there, you know. When I'm seen and I'm talking to people about being a survivor, depending on what space I'm in, right? If I'm seen as a gay man, I am not taken seriously. I've been denied spaces for CSA groups because it was predominantly women, and I couldn't be in there because it was uncomfortable for people, which is interesting for a person who does not identify as a man and identifies as fluid. In a place where we say that gender nonconformity is an actual gender identity, and if we're talking about gender-based violence, it's kind of interesting to use that kind of language and then not have services available. But then I have to actually, and it's almost a privilege within this absurdity to say, oh, I was abused as a girl. to get, you know, to try to get some sympathy, you know, to say, wait, you know, I'm a legitimate survivor here, which is kind of sucks, you know. And also the fact that it was a woman, because and then if it's a girl, it's not seen as rape or abuse. It's seen as something completely different. It's kind of like games. And even in my own family, it's not really comprehended what that means. It's just not comprehended at all. My feelings, everything that I'm feeling is just not something that, it doesn't sink through. What can another girl do to somebody else? And why has this just permeated your life? Why are you letting this, you know, take over your life? It's time to get over it, kind of stuff. So it's quite interesting. Just the gender piece alone. And in my family, it's not about people believing, which is actually a funny thing. It's not about believing. It's more about, it's actually a fact. Everyone knows it's actually true. Everyone knows it happened. My sister admitted it. So the truth is there. It's a weird thing to know that everyone knows, but they're silenced because they have no clue as to what to do. Mm-hmm. No one knows what to do. So no one speaks to me but they all have engagement with the person who did this to me.
Right.
Because they just don't know what to say. I think they're just stunned. So it's easier to talk to someone else than it is to me.
And in this configuration today, you're the first contributor. I mean, I didn't share my story, but you're the first contributor who read where you didn't receive the support. So, you know, Adenike received support from both of her parents. Tonya received support as a child, but in terms of you know, not receiving that support when you needed it. And now you are a parent and a grandparent. How do you see, like, what's your process? You know, like not having received that support that we all children need and deserve, and then even as an adult not receiving, you know, accountability as an adult. How has that played out for you?
It's a hard pill to swallow, really, because it's something that continues on to at this very moment. The trying to get the it really isn't. It's about it's an invisibility, really. It's an acknowledgement of an invisibility. It is feeling like an absolute insane person in the middle of a crowded room, screaming and saying, "Can you see me? Please see me. Can you see me?" It's like, can you see everything that has been affected in my entire orbit because of this? And it's just, please see me, and no one can see it. That's what it feels like with my family. But it's a difficult thing because I don't see them as demons or anything like that. I think it's a really hard thing because I don't think they have the skills or the resources or anything, and don't even know how to begin that process. And it feels almost funny. I said to my family, I was like, I do national work and I work with people every day to do this, to heal. And I don't have the capacity to do this with my own family, which is kind of funny. And I think a lot of us that do this work, we kick ass with other people, but we can't do this shit with our own family. It is hard. It is hard work.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And we'll talk about this further with the all of us. But now we will segue to Lynn Roberts. And thank you, Ignacio.
Thank you, hon.
Change interpreters. Or you're good, Yolanta? Okay, great. So Lynn.
I'm not sure what happened to my video.
Oh.
Okay, there.
Okay. All right. So Lynn Roberts, also another long-term old dear friend and comrade who I met in the early 2000s. And when I was making my film, No, the Rape documentary, and Lynn was just a serious, hardcore supporter, helping me to raise money to complete a film around sexual violence committed against cisgender women and Black cisgender women and girls by Black cisgender men and boys. So that was the point, that was our point of entry. And over the years, we have just been sister friends and comrades and colleagues. And I'm intentionally not like giving bios in interest of time, but also because I'm not sure how much one wants to talk about their current work in terms, so I'm just being respectful of everyone. So just to say that. But Lynn, I look forward to hearing you read your excerpt of your piece. And I believe, as I said with Ignacio, when they were sharing their piece, that you and Ignacio's experiences are very different. I mean, everybody's experience is unique, but just different in terms of family responses. So looking forward to hearing what you will share.
Thank you. And I am very grateful to be here with all of you. Thank you for those who've shared already. So I will just begin. Throughout my writing of this essay, I have grappled with what it means to break the silences surrounding childhood sexual abuse. My own silence began when I was around 6 years young, and while I've broken my silence several times since, I have retreated back into various forms of silence several times since. I've retreated back into various forms of silence over the course of my 58 years in this world as I know it. I am not certain if my initial silence was a response to being coerced by my brother, who was 4 years older, to engage in sexual acts without my consent, to the violence I witnessed almost nightly between my parents, or some combination of these events. On accountability without further harm. I believe that love with accountability should lead us to healing and is necessary not because we wish punishment or harm to the person who has violated us, but because we seek to live in a world without child sexual abuse and other violence. In a world with love and accountability, we can envision our own child self, that child who existed before the harm, or the adult we would have become if the harm had never happened to us in the first place. When we have love with accountability, we can ask for what we need, even many years and decades after the harm. Through love with accountability, we can envision the person who sexually abused us, or a loved one as a child, still dwelling with us in this world, or family, or community, and not burning in hell or locked up for life in a prison cell. We can see them as also capable of healing and less likely or no longer capable of causing further harm to us or to anyone else. 20 years before I told my mother, my brother and I talked about his abuse of me. Neither of us had the tools or the wisdom necessary to hold him accountable for his actions. With the silence finally broken, I felt some relief, but I was not healed. I figured we would always be family and that his harmful actions, however unreconciled, would not change that. Indeed, for the second time during our adulthood, my brother has come to live with me. Had I seen him only as the perpetrator of my childhood, I am certain I would have felt unsafe welcoming him into my home, especially with my daughters and now also my young granddaughter living with me. Instead, I have viewed this as an ongoing opportunity for my brother and me to continue our journey toward healing from all the harm caused, witnessed, and experienced during our childhood. That said, my practice of love with accountability requires that my granddaughters and grandsons must be given the tools they need to tell someone should their sexual and bodily autonomy ever be threatened. This should happen without stifling their natural sexual curiosity and explorations. Just as important, the adults who care for them must also be given the tools they need to hear them, to protect them, and to hold other adults accountable. Crafting new tools to dismantle, envision, and rebuild. While we must continually strive to dismantle the patriarchy, white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, and xenophobia that undergird childhood sexual abuse, we must simultaneously build a new foundation of families and communities strong enough to ensure the safety and well-being of all our children. Every child is not as fortunate as young Zuri to have a parent like spoken word artist and activist Stacey Ann Chin teaching her that no means no. That is what makes this anthology so critical and is why we must use every organizing, educational, cultural, artistic, and social media tool at our disposal to counter the hegemony of rape culture that pervades American society from the cradle to the grave. Let us envision a society that does not empower the carceral state to intervene in the affairs of our families and communities, but instead builds Black feminist magical spaces for multi-generational families to gather and be healed from the multiple harms of systemic oppression, especially child sexual abuse. Inspired by the writings of Toni Cade Bambara and Audre Lorde, and quoting from one of her students, Bell Hooks describes this magic in her book, Sisters of the Yam. Healing occurs through testimony, through gathering together everything available to you and reconciling. The beauty and promise of approaching child sexual abuse as preventable and as a family and community crisis, rather than as a secret or a crime when it does happen, is that it allows us to see and embrace each person involved as wounded and in need of our support and guidance, rather than our judgment and punishment. When this support is provided with love and accountability, then we are each also more capable of healing from our hurt, reconciling our anger, and further evolving as human beings. I am reminded of and take to heart the words of the poet Gwendolyn Brooks, pulled from her powerful ode to freedom fighter Paul Robeson. that we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond.
Thank you, Lynn. I had forgotten and then remembered that also that your the harm that you experienced was between siblings again. And I would love to kind of just talk about your healing process and journey in the context of being each other's harvest and really moving forward, you know, with love after harm and in some cases horror it's been experienced.
Well, it has been a journey, and it has, like many roads, had its twists and turns. So I think the last time, and that was actually the first time I read with you and others in the anthology, I was not in a space of love with accountability. I was in a space of reharm from the same person. And since then, I've returned to seeking healing. And not that, I also find that when I'm and when I've been in the spaces of real hurt from the harm, it's also part of the healing too. It just is a different part of it. So let me clarify that. I brought my family into a restorative circle at the start of this year, and it was really important. But I also have carried with me this idea of having that person find their truth, their healing, but sometimes as far away from those they've harmed as possible is a part of that. I'm not talking about incarceration, but needing that space. And so I created that space for myself when I knew that it was too much for myself and my family to bear. And just knowing that there are some tools, and that I called upon those who are doing this work, who usually do it in movement space, but to bring it into my family was really, really powerful, really meaningful. It wasn't perfect in sense of the healing, but it did allow us to shift from that dark space we were in. And I just value that the tools exist, and that we can call upon them and still struggle through it, as others have said, because it's a continual journey, and
Yes.
I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful to be on it and be aware of it and pushing through it.
Yes. Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. One question, and I will at the end, after this call, I will share resources, but if you could just share, in case people are like, well, how do you do a restorative circle? Information.
So, sure. So there's a wonderful person, Ijaris Dixon, who's, not too far from where I live and do my work. And she is the founding executive director of an organization called Vision Change Win. And as I said, it's work grounded in transformative justice and community organizing, social justice work more broadly. But, knowing Ijaris and her work, I just reached out and just said, my family needs help. And, it's not traditionally what they do for families, but they had, folks as a part of their organization who had the skill set. And I was fortunate to bring that person to facilitate that process with my family. We're still in it, but I invested my resources, in a way that was necessary in my view, and really worth it. And I got back to, I would say, the love, love means a lot of things, but I feel compassion I wasn't able to feel for my brother. And I saw him do a little of his healing. I saw glimmers of it, and that, meant something.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you. So I would like to bring all of the panelists contributors back on. If you could all turn on your cameras, but stay muted, please. And I don't know, Yolanta, if you're going to stay on or shift with, okay. All right, so first I wanted to give you all, if you all have questions for each other, like, because, yeah, if you all wanted to ask each other questions. No? Or if you all wanted to offer, you know, say, oh, I didn't get to say this, and please, because I did not do this in the beginning, share your pronouns. So Aishah, she, her, and hers just went out of my head. So Ignacio, yes, please.
Oh, I wanted to say thank you to Pops and how do I pronounce your name? Adenike? Adenike? Okay. I was very happy that you mentioned, because I talk about this a lot, when you said I didn't want my father to kill or hurt that person, right? That comes up a lot, right? And very especially females, girls, when they tell a male person this is what happened, or they don't tell because of that fear. And if we actually think about that, I mean, if we actually really think about that, how many people don't actually tell because the fear of the rage? So they are protecting the person they love more so than telling, because, you know, so thank you for mentioning that, because I think so many little girls and little boys and little trans kids are terrified to say something because they don't want somebody they love to go to jail. You know, so we have to not lead with that fear and say, if anything ever happened to you, I will murder somebody. No, it would be a different conversation. Not that. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the reason, as I'm older, I'm beginning to understand a little bit more the answer to the question, like, why don't you tell? And I'm able now to have words to that. But a lot of the reasons why I probably didn't tell my mom, I can think is like just that fear of knowing, you know, my mom's rage. Like, it's not just my dad's rage, but it's also my mother's rage. I've seen her angry, you know, like, I know what my mom can do. Somebody messes with her kids. And so, you know, the complexity of, you know, this is a man that she chose to marry, that she brought into her life, and her believing she picked right. But then also it was this imagery that we created in our family of the middle class. We were living in a big old house. Like, I'm doing well in school, so, well, why break this up? I want to save this world and not break up my mother's.
Frozen. I guess they're gone.
Sorry, I was on mute. I don't know. Yeah, they're frozen. So hopefully they'll come back.
I think in listening to Pops and Adenike, I think my fear was more around this, not their anger and rage, but kind of an expectation that I wouldn't get that type of protective support or outrage, and kind of being aware that my silence, if I broke it, would be met with their silence. And that did bear out over time. You know, when I did finally break my silence, that I was faulted for bringing it up so far after the fact, as if I shouldn't have, by my mother. So, and I carry that still, you know, that Black girls, Black women aren't always protected when they do speak.
Lynn, what was the time period? How long did you wait? Like, how?
I was in my 20s. I was an adult by the time I shared it with my mother. Yeah. And I didn't tell anyone before that, other than, you know, my brother himself. We talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Tonya, when you I mean, you know, when you were, do you think that you were, as a child, like was that your cry for help when you were like, when he touches me there, or were you just, yeah.
I think it was, you know, I was about 6 or 7 at that point. And, you know, I do think, I mean, I remember vividly, but I think most importantly, it really was a triggering moment. So I actually had to make room for it because it actually was, I really was being triggered in that moment. So I did have to say to her, I do need you to know like that this is what is going on. And so it was kind of a mix of, telling a trusted person. But because that was happening, I had to interrupt it, I think. And that was the only way. I mean, I probably could have said many things, but that was the thing that I did say. But by then I was already threatening to tell. So, you know, telling him that. And so somehow I guess I was already getting myself geared up to say that. So then that occurred. And so it's so interesting you asked that question, because I don't know what was triggered. Was the experience of it triggered, or what was triggered was I need to now say. So it is very interesting. But at that age, I just knew that I just, you know, in that experience, in that moment, it was the right setting, the right time, and just so grateful to this Southern grandma who, you know, just, you know, again, during that time, the fact that she didn't react in ways that she could have reacted in, that in and of itself was something. And, you know, and then, you know, of course, my heart is in pain, you know, hearing my siblings talking about experience of what also could have or may have happened in terms of response with family. So you know, it's, you know, I'm connecting there, and also know that somehow it just happened in the way it did in my situation.
I know for me, and because I did not share my story in the beginning, I chose not to read my piece, not because, I mean, it's very public, but it was just like, I can't hold the space and open up, but I have to just share. And Ignacio, you know this, that it's been, it's like this bittersweet, like I'm 51, I was molested from the ages of 10 to 12. And it's like hearing what happened with you, Tonya, and also, I mean, even though Adenike wasn't hearing about the kind of immediate response, it's just kind of like my little girl's like, oh, I wanted that. You know what I'm saying? Because I did tell. And I think that's so, like, even hearing some of these things, I was like, well, I did tell. It's not, I did not tell, and I wasn't believed or, you know, protected at the time, for a long time. I mean, it was 2016 when my mother came to grips with how she and my father did not protect me. So that was and I was molested from 79 to 81. So 2081 to 2016. And we've been on that healing and accountability journey. And just very recently, like a few weeks ago recently, the three of us, my parents are divorced, we had a Zoom conversation to really talk about it in terms of in bringing my father into the process. So it's so hard, you know, it's really hard because every family, every human being is unique. So you don't know why one family member does this or the other, and just wanting to acknowledge, you know, that even with so much healing work and ground that's been covered, the wounds are still there. So I found myself going, oh, I didn't get that, you know, or yeah, because I feel like, oh, I did all the quote unquote right things. What are the right things? And everybody responds.
Tonya, you said something, you said that you're like your perpetrator, and you said, like, quote, set me up for life, and you talked a lot about your patterns and stuff, you know, a little survivor humor. I always say, CSA, the gift that keeps on giving, because it's just like, there's so much, you know, stuff just pops up all the time, you know, and it's, you heal from something, or you get to a place, and then there's always a new challenge, and it's always the journey. There's always a journey happening. And it's just, I think that's the piece for me that is always the difficulty. It's something that I talk about a lot, especially talking about CSA, because CSA is consistently seen as a childhood issue, and it is not. CSA is not a childhood issue. It's something that occurs in childhood, but it is something that permeates throughout the entire life. And maybe it should be called something else, because it is not something that stays there. That is the thing that I think, for at least my family, doesn't understand. Like, they're like, why are you still talking about this shit? They want me to shut up about it already. They're like, come on already. It's like, it's time to like be done with it. And I'm like, I'm never gonna stop talking about this till the day I die, because this is like, it's everything that I do. It's how I think. It's how I have relationships. It's everything, and they just can't get it. So I think it's that, it comes back to that invisibility, the invisibility of the ramifications of how it just unfolds in each person's life, differently for everybody, but how it unfolds. Yeah.
I think when you spoke about the invisibility, Ignacio, that really sort of pinned me to my chair for a moment, to have you really sort of describe what that means. I appreciate that. I appreciate the sharing, and also the reinforcing of the story that keeps of the abuse that keeps on giving. Oh Lord, it feels like it's the, it's so interesting, because sometimes, like, when I look at my life, I had the supports, and at the same time I find myself, it's like a story continued to play out at every phase in my life. There hasn't been a phase when I haven't had some level of abuse, some level of bullying, some level of aggression coming at me. And it's like I'm constantly feeling like I'm sort of slaying or dealing with bullies all the time, and I haven't figured out how to shake that. And it's hard to not engage in sort of a self-blame process, right? But I am trying to, it's an ongoing healing process for sure.
We should talk. Yeah. We should talk.
It's walking to do. We'll do that.
Yes. Let's have lunch. Let's have lunch.
Virtual lunch, right?
Yeah.
Adenike, you were cut off. Did you want to pick up where you were cut off, or?
I'm not really sure where we were cut off, so I would just acknowledge that the Los Angeles Koreatown Wi-Fi was being a hater. Too many people at home right now, so we got kicked off. But I just wanted to just say thank you to everyone's stories that have been shared. What's resonating is just powerful. It really is, as a survivor, no matter what our stories and experiences are, the similarities are so similar, but it's there, because we all deal with those feelings of shame, guilt. What if, will they, I came back in right when you were talking, Aishah, about not being believed and not getting the response that I had from my mom and dad. And I recognized I call it like the silver lining, I guess, in my story, in my experience, because my parents listened to me, they believed me. I mean, even the fact that I'm telling my dad not to retaliate, he actually listened. How many times do we know that they'll say, I won't do anything, and then, it's portrayed over and over again in movies and films, I won't do anything, I won't do anything, and then they go and their ego is more, and that's what I call it, because if someone who has been through the trauma and the pain has strictly and strategically told you, please don't do anything. I just need you. I just wanted to trust you and tell you, and we can move through this. And they're asking you not to retaliate, and your decision is to go and retaliate anyway. It's really about you. It takes the focus off of the person who has been traumatized and put it on yourself as the person. I gotta vindicate. I think my dad expressed that in the TEDx talk that we did really eloquently about like his male, you know, he didn't let his male bravado kick in. And I don't want to speak for you, but I recognize that passage really struck with me because it is about that. I asked him to do something and he did it, which also made me feel heard and seen. And again, I recognize that this is such a unique and not as usual. It's not a thing that happens for everybody. Even my experience with the justice system is not this. It is pretty much something that you would see on a TV show of a survivor being believed and a police officer being helpful and taking me to their, like, I mean, I even had a Black male detective that took my statement and believed everything. And then the DA was on my side. Like, I 100% do not take for granted the uniqueness and the experience, the positive experience that I had with the justice system, because I'm not naive in any way to how it has handled these kinds of cases, because I've worked in the system, with young kids and foster youth. So I know that it is not a place that literally holds and advocates for those that need to be advocated for. But I really look at my experience like this is what needed to happen, because then we found out about my ex-stepfather. He was a serial predator. He was a predator. His MO was young girls finding their mothers, 14 years old, abusing. So it's like, for me, it was more of a power of breaking a cycle of a man who, that to me was how I held him accountable, because you need to be held accountable for these actions that you have done and these lives that you have broken. And if it didn't stop with me, the lives that he could have continued to hurt, or even mine, for all I know, it could have just gotten even worse. So I really just wanted to, that's where I wanted to jump back in and just acknowledge that I'm not naive to my experience being so different than the average person who has to deal with this.
Well, I also think that it's important to remember, so using your experience, I mean, we have had victories, you know, we have changed society's concepts. I'm not suggesting that it's perfect, but you know, the reason that particular Black cop could connect with you is because he was a member of the community. He was the spouse of a neighbor.
No,
if I remember right.
This is a totally different cop.
Okay,
but yes.
Gotcha. But there was that experience.
Yeah, that experience.
So I want to make sure, for me, as and I remember when we were doing the beginning of this work, I said, you know, let's make sure, and this is just cold truth, let's make sure people know that this is the non-abusive dude right here. Absolutely. That we're not trying to rebound and renew from stuff I did. And frankly, I wanted to make sure that I had put the work in, that anybody would know that from my youth in the 70s on, that I had put the work in, that my teachers, Miss Bombard and others, and good men, good, strong, adult, grown-ass, politically conscious men also contributed to my development and my sense that as a creative person and a member of our community, that I had a role to play as a dude in contributing to the healing and expansion of healing throughout this community of ours. So it's important for me to put that in there because, you know, I just think this is a real grappling. All of this is a grappling. Because at rock bottom, as you say, if you're going to be about love with accountability, nobody, regardless of their sexuality or gender, should be forced into anything. So that's a common ground, you know. So I get hyped about it because I want to make sure that it's important. You know what I mean? I just turned 65 yesterday. So I'm hyped about being in the mix of this conversation, that I'm not tired, that I'm not you know, scared, that I'm not worried about my comfort, or, you know, all of that stuff. The comfort thing is just the absolute worst aspect of any of this. People always want to be comfortable. I want to be in a comfortable space. No, you want to be in an ethical space. And you ain't going to be comfortable when you're being called out for taking advantage of somebody. Or, you know what I mean, where you have to, as a family, really grapple. You don't get to serenity after this kind of abuse and disrespect, you know, like a super leap. That's why I mentioned, sometimes it's this kind of a gap, sometimes it's this kind of a gap. And you got to put that work in to make that gap, you know, smaller and smaller, to where you have a synergy of humanity, a consistent humanity. So anyway, I'm just saying thank you for this, and that's what gets me excited about participating.
I think we need to change, right? Interpret. Okay. And then there were questions, one for Lynn and for Ignacio. I want to read it out. So let me unpin. Okay. So let's see. I have to put my glasses back on. So the first question this is for Ignacio. What would you say to trans folks that feel that they have to stay quiet to validate their own sexuality and or gender? Ignacio, turn on your mute. Yeah,
this is a very difficult thing, right, that I was talking about, because it is individual choice, but it's also a systemic thing, right? Because this is also about people not living in a vacuum, right? Feeling very afraid with cause about disclosing about anything that could have happened to them, right? Because that could be about not being able to get services, right? It could be about how they're viewed, their gender or their sexuality, sexual orientation, but it also could be about being denied services like I was. Depending on where you live, this is always the thing, right? Depending on if you're in a major city, if you live in a rural area, this could be very complicated. And this has a lot of moving parts, so it's not an easy answer. This is, fortunately, you know, we have the World Wide Web where we can have resources to talk to some folks and stuff. And this is definitely a very deeply personal decision for people to make, to come forward and to disclose if they have been harmed. And I understand the complexities around that. And I think this is very much connected to the complexities when men are raped and assaulted and they don't come forward because of the, you know, sexism. Sexism permeates in that way as well, you know. So it is complicated. So I can't give a straight answer to that, but I understand the difficulty in making those decisions, and how there's no good way for it, depending on everything that I just said. So sorry.
You're on mute.
Sorry, trying to, yeah. All right. So I have a question for Lynn, but I wanted to just say that we will I will be sending out an email with every people's contact information and website and resources. So there we will be able to, the conversation does not just end here. And as I said, there will be another group of contributors continuing the conversation on Wednesday. The question that Lynn received was, I'd like to ask Lynn how witnessing the beginnings of her brother's healing witnessing the beginnings of her brother's healing, how did that affect or inform her healing journey, if at all?
Well, it renewed my belief in our possibilities for healing, his and my own, and my entire family's, because the harm that he caused me was playing out differently, not through childhood sexual abuse, but in other forms of abuse in my family with my own children and his nieces and nephews. So that's what brought us into this circle. And I will say that in that moment where I saw him get in touch with his own hurt, harm, healing that he had recovered, I felt it had less to do with me in that moment. And it was what was necessary for him to heal, to even see that he had caused harm to me. Like a lot of his, adult issues were, because he had already acknowledged it to me, previously when we were much younger, but it was, I think he too carried what Ignacio talked about in terms of, why are you still talking about it? You should be fine by now. That has nothing to do with what's going on now in our lives, and him not just really dealing with what he had done to cause harm in the present. And he was living in my home. So that's what made it particularly difficult, because I've always been the one in my family to speak out and say what's not going well. Even when I was a child, even though I didn't talk about my own childhood sexual abuse, I was the one who actually stood witness at my parents' door while they harmed each other, physically, emotionally. And I was always the one saying, our family needs healing. I was, the adult child of an alcoholic, but the only one, in the family. So all of that throughout, and then I became this person helping other families to heal. And, also, like was shared by my co-panelist, that you're really good at it with others, and then how do you do it for yourself? And not even for my family, because I think I've also been the one to try and heal my own, the family that I have raised in, to the best of my ability. And I'm now at a point, that I'm nearing 60. I'll be 60 in a year from now, that I have begun to realize that I've spent a whole lifetime putting others first. And what that means. I really don't know, especially during this social isolation period. I'm not that good at putting myself first. Like I have joy and I have all kinds of wonderful things and wonderful relationships, don't get me wrong, but it's really hard for me. Like I can go periods of time really neglecting myself, but have all the energy in the world to help somebody else. So that I'm still dealing with that. Because I've gone through enough therapeutic, work over the years to be aware of it, but it's really settling into me now that I need to do something differently. And so I think to answer the question, to see my brother, because, thinking, well, he's never going to change, I was telling my children kind of, don't expect him to change because he's, he's been this way all his life kind of thing. But to see that glimmer for him and to see him wanting to, be a little different to the extent he's able. Like, I don't also have false hope that he's going to go through some, dramatic, healing process anytime soon. But I wish that for him. And I think it's possible for any of us. I wish it for myself. And I guess the other part that's hard is that my mother, the one person who again, was not as protective as I would have wanted her to be, was actually more protective of my brother when I did talk about it, now has dementia. And, I don't know that I'll ever have a reconciliation with her in that way, but I've reconciled in myself in relation to her, which allows me to, to love her as my mother, and, wish we could have had a talk that kind of ended differently than the ones we've had over the many years of my wanting to say, I'm sorry that happened.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to kind of do a stacking of questions because just want to be mindful of time and try to at least have the questions asked, and we can do popcorn style or whatever, but because of time, we have to unfortunately keep it brief, our responses. So there was one there, I'm like, there's chat and Q&A. So for those who weren't believed or supported by family, how do you work through that betrayal? I definitely want to answer that one, but I'll just give, so that's one question. Can you please share to what Adenike is speaking about in terms of breaking cycles? In what ways, as Black diasporic adult survivors, can you share how you are breaking cycles? I mean, while that's definitely was directed towards Adenike, I believe others can participate, and particularly parents. And then as a social worker, I keep thinking about how crucial therapy can be in healing from something like CSA. Would you be comfortable sharing what that therapy journey looked like for you, assuming that was part of your journey at all? And also, if faith communities played a role for any of you as you shared your story and went through the healing process. I've seen many faith communities handle CSA poorly, and it's devastating. So those are, I mean, there, and hopefully we'll have, there's a couple of more, but I'll just stop there. So I will briefly just talk about the betrayal part. I will say that it's hard. It's very hard. And it's interesting because I'm receiving the accountability that I've wanted for, I would say, most of my life, if we say that something happened at 10 and I'm 51. And then, so it's like learning as a Buddhist to strive to be in the present moment, right? So I'm receiving it in this moment, but then, you know, PTSD is real. I become angry around so many things. Not just, it's not solely the child sexual abuse that like Ignacio referenced, that there's so many components surrounding the CSA. So it's hard to look at anything without that being the backdrop. Like it's not, well, CSA is there and then this happened over there. Everything is colored. It's like how we as people of color, as Black people, talk about white supremacy. It's just, it's not like, oh, there's just that one bad thing that happened over there and we go on. No, it colors everything. So I think that for me, if it weren't for therapy, if it weren't for me, my contemplative meditation practice, as well as community in this forum, as well as just so many others who have walked parallel journeys to hold space, I don't know where I would be, but I would just say that forgiveness and healing is a moment-to-moment journey. And some days I'm like, woohoo, yes. And other days it's like, I'm enraged. And so what I'm trying to learn how to do is not, because except my grandfather is gone, he's an ancestor, but my parents are still here, and not to allow the rage to make people punching bags, if you will, emotional, psychological punching bags. So then that means taking some space. And I think that is the journey and the struggle for me, because how do you do that? Particularly in COVID, particularly with, you know, parents who are older, how do you do that? How do you hold that space and compassion for them, as well as, and also equally as important for yourself, especially when the act of being silent around CSA has asked you to put their needs over yours. So that's my answer right now.
I think I'll answer that too. I think for me, breaking that pattern, I think breaking that pattern has just been speaking. I have said that I have been a CSA survivor for so long, but this year, for the first time, even in doing all this work, all this time, I said my true story, my for real story, the full story. People, I think, only knew a little snippet of the story. And I'm talking about it much more. Before I would say a family member. Now I'm saying my sister. I'm talking about things much more. I'm saying I was, you know, abused. I'm giving more details. I'm saying things out loud. I'm saying this to my family. I'm tagging my family in things on Facebook. I'm doing that because I think everybody knows. Everybody knows. We all talk about it, you know, like behind closed doors, but I want people to just start talking about it. And so I'm making phone calls to my family. So my mom doesn't want to talk about it, but I'm going to get other people to talk about it. So that's what I'm doing to break that silence, because there are a lot of new kids coming and growing up in the family, and we're still not having those conversations. We're just still not having them. So I'll continue being the weirdo in my family and keep talking.
I'd like to just answer the three things that stood out to me. Breaking cycles, I think, Ignacio, you said it best, talking. The power of that verbiage, that word, not being silent. I remember the first time I shared is when we discovered a lot of cyclical and generational abuse in my own family, and how I'm continuing to break it is like now I think COVID has allowed me to have even more conversations with family members that I think it's creating new waves of conversation. Therapy, I believe in it. I love it. It is your way to do it. For me, it was talk therapy and group therapy that set my foundation. But I also I do inner work for PTSD and trauma-informed care now, and I'm consistently educating myself. My faith has been a full journey. I do believe it was definitely, you know, my universal God center, my Buddha, whatever, however you want to identify. But I know for me, it was really about trusting that instinctual third eye, what was telling me I need to tell now because I need to break this generational curse and I need to do X, Y, Z. Like that's been my journey. So I hope that answered. That's my quick version. Did you have anything to add?
Full participation, whatever that takes. However you define it, that's my mantra. You know, nobody gets to dismiss anything because they're uncomfortable. Nobody gets to poo-poo anything because they didn't experience it. Mm-hmm. You know, so I just stand with you, of course, as we've done in a lot of different platforms, but it's just full participation, as rich, as lush, as complex as it can be. That's what guides me in our family and whenever we do anything public like this.
Yeah, I should.
Tonya, did you want to say anything? You haven't said.
Yes. I think that, I mean, I was just contemplating, you know, breaking cycles. And as I shared, you know, I continue to still work on, you know, things that are showing up and have showed up in my life. But I think that living out loud, being direct and honest about what I'm experiencing, I think that, you know, the idea that you can be in this field and not, you know, I think that it's still that people still have trouble talking about victimization within various fields of both domestic violence and sexual assault. And I think that, and so I'm trying to speak more to it. And so breaking, I think, the silence within our fields is what I'm hoping to do. But also, I think being able to engage directly, continuing to have conversations with my mom and healing. She's a survivor of many things, continuing to have conversations with her and my daughter, who now works in the field as well, and supporting her in her process, and watching her halt situations in her life very quickly, and watching her resilience and being able to pull back and move forward has been just, you know, so amazing to witness. So I think that those are the ways that I'm breaking cycles. Yes.
Thank you. Lynn, look like.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing I'm interested in is the building of communities that, you know, embody and reflect what, you know, Adenike and Pops, or Peter, is it, talk about, and that village of men that you describe, you were exposed to, that my sons don't have. And it's, you know, as a single parent, former young parent, you know, I don't say I was a teen parent. I was a young parent because I was fully capable of becoming a parent at that age. Just a sense of, you know, how do we create that? Because I have relied, like Tonya, I have relied on the criminal and justice system to intervene in my family. I did it as a child because I was sometimes the one calling the police to save my parents from each other. And even with, you know, my own family that I'm raising and being raised with and by, this sense of, you know, sometimes you can't bring the folks that you need to help when you most need it. So as we think of, you know, how we can make that more accessible to more of us, that's what I think about when I think of my children, my grandchildren, and, you know, my great-great-grandchildren I may not get to see. You know, what will that look like? And I guess thinking about it now in this space, when I think of the children who may be isolated right now during the physical distancing, who aren't safe in their homes right now. And, you know, what that looks like to create that, you know, magnify, beyond the family unit as we think of it, you know. And I know there's many people talking about it and doing this in movement space, but I also think sometimes when it comes down to it and it's your family in crisis, you know, where do you find that? Because I've been there where I you know, I called upon people who didn't show up or didn't know how to show up. And so I think about that a lot, and how we create these spaces for that to happen and to envision that. And I know many of you here are doing that work. So the more we can create that, you know, collectively, you know, it's what I think about. It's what I dream about. It's what I want to, you know, contribute to.
You know, one of the things I said last week on a different webinar is that, you know, children are always sheltering in place. You know, I mean, COVID, they are sheltering, but we're, you know, unless they're running away from home, like that, and I hope that this moment, as all of us are aware of sheltering in place, that as we move through whatever the new era will look like after the shelter in place laws have been lifted, and hopefully we will be safe and not having to, you know, go out and engage in a very unhealthy, at least biologically unhealthy space, that we will remember that children are always sheltering in place, and what is the work we can do to ensure that they are safe. There were more questions, but we're like down to the wire, and I just wanted to give an opportunity for y'all to breathe, like a minute, like less than a minute, just if there's anything you want to say. I want to really also share that I will send out an email with contact information of all of the panelists, and there, I know Ignacio has a very extensive website, the HEAL Project, with videos of them with their daughter, and just work around talking around sex education from cradle to grave through a survivor activist lens. And Peter and Adenike have an incredible TED Talk that I encourage everyone to see. And they also have website information. And then with Lynn and Tonya, there's ways to connect on social media as well. So I will, oh, and that, yeah, thank you.
This is
reason we're all here. Yeah, the book, Love with Accountability. It is available for $1.99 on AK Press. It's an ebook. It's an ebook for people who can't deal with mail or whatever. And then it's also available as a print copy, but at least right now, thank you.
Real book.
a real book.
Get your royalties.
And please get it from AK Press. Support independent publishers. AK Press said yes in May of 2018, and the book came out in October of 2019. That we were both clear that we wanted this book to get out as soon as possible, and they did everything within their power to make it happen, and also did not censor the voices. That what we see in the anthology is what people wrote. I mean, you know, there's some copy edits, but in terms of that we honored the voices of diasporic, Black, cis and trans and queer and straight. I am queer. I never said that from the beginning, but I am a lesbian, as well as deaf survivors. And so it's just real Black deaf survivors who really have just a diaspora, Latinx, Ghanaian, really trying to include as many voices as possible within experiences, because while they're parallels, no story is the same, and really wanted to give a collage of the diaspora.
Exactly.
Got like,
and then also there's Conversating with Pops and Ade. We have our podcast is out. Yeah. Conversating with Pops and Ade. If you Google Peter, any streaming service, Apple, Spotify, but yes, and it is Conversating. Yes, that is correct.
and it's also and all of that will be in the what do you call it, the contact information. And then we will be back here again on Wednesday with Enina J, Alicia Sanchez Gill, Edzie Betts, Mel Phillips, and Kai Green, 5 additional contributors on Wednesday. So please either join us or spread the word, having these complex, hopefully empowering, healing conversations. And wait, I'm sorry, I'm always like, wait, but I have to once again thank the interpreters, Yolanta Galloway, Pamela Collins, and Nicole Schamberger, who graciously and generously provided their services, because this is a zero budget. And then my partner, Sheila, that's why I've been looking away, and she's giving me notes and all of that. She's in the background, Sheila Alexander Reed, and she's already telling me to thank other people who I'm getting ready to, Sam Davis and Lee Perrine, who really got us up to speed, because prior to yesterday, it would have been really pitiful in terms of our Zoom expertise. So just, it takes a village, and I just want to thank the village for making this all possible.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Aishah. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Gathering us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all for your
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Look to collaborate more with you all.
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Oh, it's recorded. I will put the recording up once on my Vimeo channel, and then put it on the Love with Accountability Facebook page. So it will be freely accessible. If you miss parts, want to go back to parts, share with others. So this Zoom is recorded, and as soon as I can, I will put it on Vimeo and make it accessible freely. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet everyone.
That was awesome. But we're online.